Welcome back to Block 8. This time we're going to deal with something totally different. Wrinkles. Who doesn't like wrinkles? I think she doesn't. But they do. And when we're done, you will too. So let's get started. You need 2 pieces of fabric, fairly plain, 10 inches square, and some rubber bands. Now we're going to take each of those pieces and we're going to thoroughly soak them. If you have somebody to help you with the next step, that's nice. But if you don't, you can do it yourself, because what we're going to do is we're just going to wring those fabric strips or squares as tightly as we possibly can until they actually start to curl over on themselves. Once we get to that point, then we're going to put rubber bands around them so they stay twisted just like that. And we'll do both pieces exactly the same way. Now comes the hard part. These 2 twisted up masses have to be completely dry inside and out before you can proceed. I want to issue a strong warning. Do not try to dry it in your microwave. I issued this warning years ago to a class I was teaching, and someone thought they knew better and did it anyhow, and came in with a piece of fabric with a hole burnt right through the middle. So heed my warning. It is finally dry. Remove the rubber bands, and we're going to slowly begin to unwrap it. Now you want to do this slowly because you may get partway through only to find out it's not totally dry. If that's the case, twist it back up and wait a little longer. If it is, however, dry, now you want to untwist it, but don't pull, just let it untwist. If you pull too hard, you'll pull out the wrinkles that we just worked so hard to get in there. Look at the lovely texture that this piece of fabric has. But we're just beginning. This is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And now that we have them unwrapped, we're going to go ahead and unwrap the other one. I'll show you what we're going to do next. Here are both pieces of fabric carefully unwrapped, and you can see the texturizing that has happened on this piece, or these 2 pieces of fabric. Now we're going to very carefully, after we put our Teflon or parchment paper down on our ironing surface to protect it, we're going to pin the corners of these fabric swatches to our ironing surface. Now when we're doing this, again, you want to be very careful that you're not stretching the wrinkles right out of the fabric. We want those wrinkles we worked hard for. So we're just going to go ahead and pin this all in place in 4 corners. After that's done, and you'll notice we have that pinned right side down. Now we're going to put your fusible interfacing with the glue side towards the wrong side of the fabric. And we're using a steam iron now because the steam will unleash the adhesive. And we're going to press, not iron, press down on the stabilizer, or I'm sorry, on the interfacing to fuse those wrinkles into place. That way they're not going anywhere. It takes about 3 to 5 seconds with this fusible that I'm using here, and that's the French fuse. A very lightweight Pellon type stabilizer may take a few seconds longer, but it still doesn't take long at all to do. The one thing that you do have to keep in mind, however, is when you unpin this, you may be very, very tempted to flip it over and press it from the other side. You definitely don't want to do that. Look at all that fusible interfacing or stabilizer that's exposed. That would be all over the base of your iron. Textured wrinkled surface has turned out very well. Now on for the next phase. This is the time that you can finally get acquainted with all those decorative stitches on your machine that you very rarely ever use. It's time to have fun. There's no rules, there's no right way, there's no wrong way. You do what you want to do. Use contrasting threads, yarns, trims, whatever you want to use to further tack down the wrinkles in your fabric and create even more texture in this piece. Make sure you use several colors. Just pick out the colors that you've used so far and just introduce them to these wrinkled pieces. You can almost just let the fabric feed through itself without even having to guide it, because there's just no right or wrong. Don't forget you can use straight stitches also. Have fun with this piece. Here's something else you can do even if you don't have a couching foot. You can just use a thin yarn and a narrow zigzag stitch and stitch the yarn down to the surface. That makes an interesting look as well. You want to keep the yarn centered in the middle of the foot to make sure that the zigzag stitch catches it correctly. If, however, you get carried away and there's a couple spots that aren't caught up with your zigzag stitch, you can pick those up later when you're doing decorative stitches over top of it. Just make sure you aim for the places that weren't stitched before. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, now we're going to start another piece of yarn in another area. And again, we're going to start stitching this, and we want to make sure that we keep it curved to add a little bit of interest. But sometimes we get carried away and we maybe go too fast, or we do too sharp of a curve like that. You'll notice I didn't quite get the zigzag stitch on that particular area when I did a sharp bend, but I can catch that later. So now we have both of our pieces done. They may not look so hot right now, but when we get done with them, you'll be pretty impressed. So here's the one block. And you can see why I said you don't want to use too big of a print, because if you do, it'll just get lost in the shuffle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to trim each of these blocks to 6 1/4 inches square. They're almost starting to look better already. Now we're going to take those squares and cut them diagonally in both directions, and that will give us 8 triangles. Now from your background fabric, you need to cut a strip of fabric 4 inches by 32 inches and cut this into 4-inch squares. You'll then cut that diagonally, just one way, and you'll end up with 16 triangles. Bias edges and sharp points. Seems like a place for more paper piecing. You know how to do this, so we're not going to go too in depth. But when you print out your templates, make sure that you choose actual size and not print to fit, and measure that 1-inch square to make sure that you have the correct sizing. We've done this many times before, so I'm not going into too much detail with this. But you know that first you're going to place the triangle down and you're going to make sure that it's covering all the lines. Then you'll take the other triangle cut from your background fabric with the long edge of the triangle against the center triangle. And we're going to go ahead and stitch between 1 and 2. I need to make my stitch length a little shorter. There we go. So there's 2 more pieces done. And if we turn it over, we can press that up. It's starting to look pretty good. Got a little sparkle going on there from that yarn too. That's kind of nice. Now let's take the other triangle, again long side against piece 1. By pre-cutting these diagonals, it makes it a little easier to know where to lay your paper piecing as well. So let's go ahead and stitch that between piece 1 and 3. And we'll have half the block done. I told you I was going to make this block a lot easier after I made you suffer through the Y seams last time. So far I think you can tell that this is a pretty easy block to do. So there's half of our block done. Now if we pick it up, you'll see that we need to do a lot of trimming before we add piece 4. So let me go ahead and trim that off, and I'll be back. And through the magic of video, there it is, all trimmed off, nice and neat. Now we're going to lay piece 4 down. By the way, you want to always start with the lightest color, and then the second big triangle will be your darker color. Let's repeat that again. When you're doing this, piece 1 should be the lightest color. Piece 4 should be the darker color. And we're ready to stitch again. Now we could have done these flying geese the traditional way, but again, the beauty of paper piecing is, look how nice that point meets up with the next piece. Sometimes it's hard to do that with regular piecing. And we're working with a little bit of a bulk compared to normal cotton because we added all the embellishments and we have the interfacing fused to the piece of fabric. So that makes the paper piecing work out even better. So we have that piece on, one more piece to go, and we're done with this segment. Again, long edge against the center triangle. to make sure everything's okay under there. And now let's stitch. Now the nice thing about this Dutchman's puzzle, that's what this block is called, is there's no matchy-matchy going on. The only thing matchy-matchy would be if you had to match up those points for the flying geese, but since we're piecing, no problem. So when you're all done, you should have 4 segments, just like the one we just finished. And this is where it's really nice because there is no matching. What you're going to end up with by putting the lighter colors for pieces 1 and the darker colors for pieces 4, you'll end up with these pinwheels in the center. So I've already stitched the one segment together, and you'll see how each one just kind of goes around the clock as far as where it points. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this, and we'll have the 4 sections stitched together by halves. Now when I'm done with this, what I'd like to do is remove the stabilizer from the seams that we just stitched. That takes some of the bulk out of the seam line. Don't take it all away yet, just from the seam lines. And now we're going to stitch those 2 halves together. Once we're done with that, make sure you have the right orientation, and you'll stitch along those 2 pieces right on the stitching line on the foundation piece. And you can see how there's no stabilizer on that center seam. And this is what you end up with. There's your block. It's kind of fun, wasn't it? It's amazing how we took 2 pieces of fabric that were pretty blah and turned them into something special to make a special block. It also gives the block a lot of movement. So until next time, I hope you enjoy this, and we'll see you next month.